Iranian missiles target the city that's home to Israel's nuclear program. More than 50 people are injured in Dimona. Tehran says the attack was in response to U.S. Israeli strikes across Iran. A southern city and a major nuclear enrichment site have also been hit.
We not only took out the facility, but also destroyed intelligence support sites and missile radar relays that were used to monitor ship movements.
A senior U.S. naval commander says Iran's ability to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz has been degraded. And Israeli attacks destroy more of Beirut's southern suburb. Across Lebanon, more than 1 million people have been forced out of their homes. In a new wave of strikes, Hezbollah and Iran have targeted several cities across southern and northern Israel. An attack on the city of Dimona has left more than 50 people injured and caused extensive damage. The Israeli army says it's investigating the failure to intercept an Iranian ballistic missile. Dimona is home to Israel's central nuclear facility. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it's received no indication of damage at the Negev Nuclear Research Center and confirmed that no abnormal radiation levels were detected. The facility is 13 kilometers southeast of Dimona, home to around 40,000 people. Well, those attacks come after Iran reported its Natanz nuclear facility was attacked on Saturday. The UN nuclear watchdog has called for military restraint to avoid the risk of radiation leak in Iran. Israel claims it wasn't involved in the attack. Natanz is Iran's largest nuclear facility and central to its uranium enrichment program. It's also one of the sites that the US targeted in June last year. Right, well, we have reporting from Washington, Tehran, Baghdad and Amman. But first, let's go now to Rob McBride in Jordan. Rob, I'll start with you on the attack on Dimona, because it's home to Israel's nuclear facility, we were saying. And it looks like it was a close call there.
Yeah, this was a very significant attack on what is a very strategically important city. Dimona is pretty much the home of Israel's nuclear program in the Negev desert down in the south of the country. It does appear that from this salvo, one ballistic missile got through defenses and there was a direct strike. But we also understand that there were several other impacts reported around the city. The number of casualties has been put now at over 50, most of those requiring hospital treatment, with one 12-year-old boy said to be in a very serious condition with shrapnel injuries. This is, according to the Iranians, in retaliation for this attack on Natanz, its nuclear facility. Now, Israel has said it didn't take part in that. That was an American operation. But Israel has accepted responsibility for other attacks. For example, recently an attack on what they say was a nuclear weapons research center at a university in Tehran. And Dimona has been the subject of attacks throughout Saturday. There have been a total of 7 air raid alerts being raised in the city as missiles were trying to get through. I think during this one of the last salvos on Saturday evening, this is when these missiles and debris managed to get through the defensive screen. And given the importance, the strategic importance of this city, and also the fact that Israel prides itself on intercepting a high ratio of incoming missiles, there is going to be an investigation into how this missile could get through. But just as we've been coming on air, there have been other attacks. A very serious attack also being reported in the southern city of Arad. Again, a direct missile strike from a ballistic missile, with Israeli media reporting that a total of 6 people have been killed and more than 100 others injured in that strike. And we're still getting details on that attack.
All right, stay with us, Rob, though, because we will come back. And Manuel, let's bring in Tohed Asadi, who's live for us in the Iranian capital, Tehran. And Tohed, a response, it seems, to the attack on Natanz nuclear facility. Now, that's in Iran. As we were saying, Israel says it wasn't them. But regardless who it was, has there been any damage reported? And what more can you tell us about the actual facility itself?
Well, actually, this is not the first time Iranian nuclear facilities are coming under attack. back in June, we saw 3 critically important nuclear facilities of the country, Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, under attack. And then it was the U.S. President Donald Trump coming out clearly saying that it has obliterated the Iranian nuclear facilities, at least in those 3 points. But still, we saw another round of attack on these facilities, specifically in Natanz. There is no detailed information about the actually amount of attack in that regard, but still there are potential warnings about contamination and radiation after these recent attacks. And Iran says, at least based on what we heard from the state TV, that it is a sort of tit-for-tat retaliatory strategy that it has taken since the beginning of the airstrikes, the campaign that Americans and Israelis started. And of course, this is quite clear and indicative of de-escalation being ramped up to a next level. Of course, as a reaction, we've got statements specifically from the Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, in that regard, coming on his X account to say that if the Israeli regime fails to intercept the missiles in the highly protected area of Dimona, it will be an operational sign of entering a new phase of battle. And then, quote unquote, he says, Israel's sky are defenseless. This is, of course, indicative, as I told you, of another escalation, and of course, in line with the Iran's retaliatory strategy in that regard.
All right, Manuel Rapallo in Washington, D.C. Manuel, so Israel says it wasn't them, and if true, then it really perhaps only points to the United States for carrying out this attack. Has it commented on this at all?
We're still not seeing a whole lot of chatter here in the United States on this right now. The fixation is really over the sort of contradictory statements by President Trump, who claims that the war is winding down, with many people sort of saying, how can this be when the president says that the war is winding down, but there's still calls for more funding from the Pentagon to the tune of $200 million when there's the deployment of troops on the table here. But there is a strategic message from the White House right now, and that's that President Trump is signaling that the U.S. is close to being done with the war, that the U.S. is close to finishing all of its military objectives. Essentially, what President Trump is saying is that the U.S. has already won in Iran, militarily at least. At least that's the message that President Trump is trying to convey specifically to the American people, which are every day increasingly becoming more concerned with how long this war is going to be dragged on, with how much it's going to cost. We heard from Admiral Brad Cooper of U.S. Central Command today, who was saying that the pressure is going to be consistent on Iran. So even if military operations are scaled back in Iran, the idea of having more troops being sent to the region, it's expensive. This is one of the reasons that we're hearing Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth say that there's going to be calls for more war spending to the tune of $200 billion being requested from Congress very soon. So right now, there is this back and forth over the contradictory sounding language from President Trump, but it is a strategic message that the president is giving. Not on the one hand to the American people, reassuring them that the war is winding down, that the war could very soon be coming to an end, and another message to the rest of the world saying that America is going to continue to portray strength and perseverance in this conflict.
All right, thanks very much, Manuel Rapallo there for us from Washington, D.C. Now, Iranian media are reporting the armed forces launched 2 ballistic missiles towards Diego Garcia. That's an island in the Indian Ocean that hosts a joint UK-US military base. Now, before the war, Iran was believed to have missiles capable of striking targets 2,000 kilometers away. For an Iranian weapon to reach Diego Garcia, it would need to have a range of more than 4,000 kilometers. The UK Defense Ministry says the attack was unsuccessful, but the Israeli military has warned the missile could target cities in Europe.
Iran launched a 2-stage intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of 4,000 kilometers at an American target on the island of Diego Garcia. These missiles are not intended to strike Israel. Their range reaches European capitals. Berlin, Paris, and Rome are all within direct threat range.
Let's go back to Rob McBride in the Jordanian capital. Rob, so a warning there from the Israelis. It's sort of the missile, the ballistic missiles that were headed to Diego Garcia is really playing into the Israeli narrative that this is why they went to the war in the first place.
Yeah, I think the Israeli leadership are really making a lot of political capital out of what was a surprising appearance of this much longer-range ballistic missile. Interestingly, with there have been various comments coming out of the Israeli leadership just about the state of this war and how long it is likely to last, especially given some of the contradictory statements coming from their allies, the US. People have been looking to Israel to see if they can shed any light on just how long this conflict might go on for. We've been having some interesting comments, first of all, from the Defense Minister, Israel Katz, saying that this conflict is far from being over, and indeed saying that we are just about to get into a more intensive phase of fighting, without detailing exactly what that is. But also the comments from the head of the military here, General El Zamir, talking about the missile being fired at Diego Garcia, but also intriguingly saying that in his estimation, Israel is currently around at the halfway point in its campaign of fighting against Iran, which would mean that after, 3 weeks of fighting, now getting into week 4, the estimate would seem to be that they are counting on this conflict, or the fighting part of this war, lasting maybe between 6 and 8 weeks, which does fall largely into line with many of the other predictions we have been hearing about. As far as the Israeli public is concerned, there is a certain amount of war weariness as this war goes on and gets into this 4th week of being constantly having to go to shelters and so on. But I think there is a general acceptance and a general feeling from most Israelis, who mostly believe that a nuclear-armed Iran is an existential threat, that they have to put up with the privations of this conflict, that ultimately it will be worth it.
All right, thanks very much. That's Rob McBride there for us in Amman. And let's go back to Tawhid, because I also want to ask you what the Iranians have been saying about the attack. We've heard, obviously, from the Israelis there. What is Iran saying?
Well, actually, about the recent developments, and specifically about the missile capabilities, we know that previously Iran announced the 2,000 self-imposed limitation for its long-range missiles, but it seems that from the war back in June last year, there is a sort of a strategic shift. And of course, we know that technically speaking, there is a possibility for increasing the range of these missiles, specifically seeing that these are missiles that are carrying heavy warheads, and with decreasing the warheads capacity, there is a possibility for increasing the range of those missiles. All in all, this is a very existential threat that Iran is facing, and it has been mentioning from time to time, specifically over the past week, that in case of any attack, there are going to be U.S. bases across the region under attack, and of course any third country that gets engaged in these strikes is going to be their quote-unquote legitimate target. So what we can say is a sort of escalated situation in which Iran tries to cope with the situation. It tries to actually unveil the new cards, specifically when it comes to its weaponry toolbox. And under this delicate situation, we are just closely following to see what comes next.
All right, thanks very much there. That's Tawhid Asadi in Tehran. Well, the US Central Command says Iran's ability to strike ships in the Strait of Hormuz has been degraded. Admiral Brad Kruper says attacks earlier this week targeted an underground weapons facility.
We also remain zeroed in on dismantling Iran's decades-old threat to the free flow of commerce throughout the Strait of Hormuz. For example, earlier this week, we dropped multiple 5,000-pound bombs on an underground facility located along Iran's coastline. The Iranian regime used the hardened underground facility to discreetly store anti-ship cruise missiles, mobile missile launchers, and other equipment that presented a dangerous risk to international shipping. We not only took out the facility, but also destroyed intelligence support sites and missile radar relays that were used to monitor ship movements. Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation in and around the Strait of Hormuz is degraded as a result, and we will not stop pursuing these targets.
Let's speak to William Alberg, a senior adjunct fellow at the Pacific Forum. He's the former director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Center, and he joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Thank you for having the time to speak to us here at Al Jazeera. Two nuclear countries at war here, nuclear facilities under threat in both nations. Is this an escalation, do you think?
Well, I think this is the logical outcome of the U.S. attacks. And when we're trying to think about how Donald Trump would declare victory, I think he can't declare victory until he solves something regarding the very large amount, 440.9 kilograms of 60% enriched, highly enriched uranium that has so far been unaccounted for since the bombings back in June. So that's why I think we see this new bombing at Natanz to try to resolve the issue and to claim that we've neutralized this reservoir of material from which Iran could derive a nuclear weapon.
And for people like myself and others in the region, when I heard the news, especially about Natanz, this is the second time because it was attacked in the war last year. I mean, here in Qatar, we're just across the water from Iran. We're not that far away. The first thing that comes to mind is, are we safe?
If we're talking about bombing the facilities where they enriched uranium or a facility, we suspect there's another facility near Natanz that Iran might be storing the enriched uranium, you are completely safe. Because if this material is hit, if the containers, you're talking about a uranium hexafluoride gas in basically a metal tube like you would keep carbon dioxide or propane. If it's punctured, the uranium gas can escape, and it's very dangerous if you're in the room with it. But a kilometer away, you would have no idea this happened. There's no radiological release possible really outside a number of meters. This really is not an environmental hazard, except if you're in the room. If you're nearby and you breathe in this gas, sure, it's dangerous. But we're not talking about fission. We're not talking about Chernobyl. We're not talking about attacking a working reactor. We're talking about a nuclear fuel that is in gaseous form, that is not combustible. It's not going to poison the atmosphere or damage people way off site, as in, across the Gulf.
But could it go horribly wrong? Because the US and Israel says that their goal here is to completely, I'll use a word that Trump uses, obliterate the nuclear program in Iran, for them to not be able, not just set it back, but to not be able to rebuild it again. If it hits facilities twice like that, how do you mitigate a disaster from happening?
Again, there's no threat of an environmental disaster. Actually, the worst disaster we could have is that we have overconfidence that we've actually destroyed it. Right now, we believe that a lot of this material is buried under rubble, and we think the Iranians have not been able to recover it and move it off-site. So the United States is clearly trying to either destroy it in place or further bury it to make it impossible to recover. But even then, we don't know if all of it is in that facility. Some of it may have been moved to Esfahan. Some of it may have been moved to a site that we don't even know about. And so there is the possibility, the worst case scenario, is that this material is unaccounted for. And we have this lingering doubt that there may be highly enriched uranium that can be used for a nuclear weapon somewhere that we can't tell whether it's been destroyed, buried, neutralized. It might just be gone. And the worst case scenario would be that it's being traded on the open market, proliferated to other countries.
We talk a lot throughout this war, because we're hearing it from Israel and Iran about, from the US and Israel about Iran with these nuclear facilities. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Israel is a nuclear country, from what we understand. They have been very ambiguous about it. It also is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So should we be concerned about that?
Well, I mean, I am concerned to hear that Iran is trying to strike nuclear facilities in Israel, such as Dimona. This is a working nuclear facility. If it is struck, it will have environmental consequences. It's also so interesting in this whole thing, when you look at it and you think, people are saying, well, if Iran had nuclear weapons, they wouldn't be attacked. But as you just said, Israel has nuclear weapons, but they're being attacked. So I think we overestimate the value of nuclear weapons in terms of deterring attacks. And, the idea that Iran would get one nuclear weapon and somehow that would save them is erroneous. Actually, it still opens you up to further combat. But again, I am concerned. I do not want to see any nuclear power plant attacked. Both the U.S. and Israel have been relatively restrained in terms of targeting Iran's working nuclear reactors at Bushehr and in Tehran. And I hope that continues, because I don't want to see that, because that would cause an environmental disaster that could threaten your country as well.
All right, thank you very much for your thoughts there, William Alberk.
Thank you.
Turning to Iraq now, where there are reports of a drone attack targeting a US diplomatic facility that's near Baghdad airport. Nicholas Huck is live for us in the Iraqi capital. Nicholas, can you update us on these attacks?
Well, Sarah, I was just hearing, just before we went live, the planes hovering above us, American warplanes. But we just got a report from the police, who is on the ground there near Victory Base, where the drone launched a missile, according to this police report. It says that there's a large fire and there's plumes of smoke rising following a missile strike from two drones, one inside the base and the other in the surrounding area. Now, this is a blow to the Americans. This is supposed to be one of the most secure areas, Sarah, in Baghdad. And yet, it appears that Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are able to launch attacks in that area. And it comes as no surprise, since yesterday they said they were going to escalate attacks, not just on that site, but any other sites where there are Americans. Now, just a few hours ago, there's been also two attacks on the autonomous Kurdish regions. Two drones launched north of Mosul, headed towards Erbil. Now, they were intercepted by U.S. defense system, but according to an Iranian-backed militia in Iraq media, they say that their target was the U.S. consulate in Erbil. Now, the U.S. air defense system that's here in Baghdad was either not active, or wasn't able to intercept those missiles. So what's interesting here, whilst in Washington we hear from Trump saying that he's winning this war, well, here in Iraq, Iran is projecting power in its ability to target U.S. military bases here in Iraq.
Yes, certainly it seems to be on a daily basis. And a couple of hours ago, a policeman was killed near the intelligence headquarters. What happened there?
Well, a drone was launched on the Iraqi headquarters of the intelligence services and struck the office of that intelligence officer who passed away, who died. But what's interesting in this is that these Iranian-backed militias in Iraq said that their target are the U.S., or what they describe as the invading force here in Iraq. And so there's been a chorus of condemnation from the political landscape here in Iraq, notably from the Iraqi politician Saidi al-Hakim, who says that the targeting of the Iraqi intelligence service headquarters constitutes a blatant attack on the sovereignty and the state of its institution, saying that this is a dangerous escalation. So, Sarah, whilst Washington says it's winning this war, here Iran is projecting power, and it's saying through its Iran-backed militias in Iraq that it can target any site here in Iraq.
All right, thank you very much. Nicholas Huck there, live for us in Baghdad. Now, Saudi Arabia has ordered an Iranian military attaché and 4 other diplomats to leave the country within 24 hours. That's after declaring them persona non grata. Iran has been keeping up attacks on its Gulf neighbours. A series of drone and missile strikes have targeted Saudi Arabia. In the United Arab Emirates, air defences intercepted several projectiles over the skies of Dubai. And Bahrain says its air defences have intercepted and destroyed hundreds of missiles and drones targeting the kingdom since the start of the war. 2 people were killed in separate Iranian attacks, with the latest strike hitting a residential building in the capital, Manama. Let's now speak to Malik Trainer, our correspondent who's live for us in Kuwait City. Malik, Iran has hit an oil refinery in Kuwait once again. What are you learning on that?
Well, we still haven't heard anything from authorities here about that specific attack. But Al Ahmadi port, which is about 30 kilometers to the south of where I'm standing, was hit twice in the last, I would say, more than maybe 2 to 3 days. Just goes to show the escalation that this conflict is having across the Gulf. You know, yesterday, we had about 7 alarms raised here in Kuwait. And the Defense Ministry just a little earlier said within the last 24 hours, Kuwait, they intercepted 9 ballistic missiles and 4 drones. And we've also seen a wave of attacks across the Gulf. You know, with the UAE, they said they intercepted 3 missiles, 8 drones. And in Saudi Arabia today, within the last, I would say, 30 hours, 5 dozen drones were intercepted. That's around 60 drones, and many of them targeting the eastern area, which is home to the Al Shaiba oil field. So, you know, we're more than 3 weeks into this conflict, and there's been a relentless array of attacks, retaliation attacks from Iran to the Gulf throughout this conflict.
Right, and Iran and Saudi Arabia have had their differences. Iran and Saudi Arabia has had their differences before this war, after nearly 3 weeks of attacks. Where do things now stand diplomatically between the two nations? Because there is tensions.
There's definitely tension. You mentioned, you know, they asking the military attaché as well as 3 other diplomats to leave the country within 24 hours. Just 2 days ago, the Saudi foreign minister said that, you know, the trust that was between the 2 countries is almost completely shattered. I mean, look, you know, throughout this conflict, the Gulf in general, all the countries have tried to, you know, say they were wanting a diplomatic approach. You know, that Iran is their neighbor, and they're going to continue to be their neighbor even after this conflict eventually ends. But what we're starting to see now is an uptick of, you know, more heightened tensions between them. You know, with the Saudi Arabia saying that it reserves the right to retaliate. And we're also seeing statements, you know, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Saudi Arabia earlier in a statement said it categorically condemned the blatant Iranian aggression against the kingdom, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, and a number of Arab and Islamic countries. Earlier, President Sisi of Egypt was in Bahrain meeting the king there, where they also, you know, condemned the Iranian attacks against the Gulf. I was speaking to a couple people earlier here in Kuwait, and, you know, what one person told me, there's a famous Arabic poet who says something along the lines that there's nothing beautiful about war except the ending. And I think that's a sentiment across the Gulf that people share. You know, people want a swift end to this conflict as soon as possible.
All right, thank you very much for that update. That's Malik Trainer there in Kuwait City. Well, Israel has launched more attacks targeting southern Beirut. Ahead of the strikes, the army issued forced evacuation warnings for several neighborhoods. The Israeli military says it's targeting Iran's ally, Hezbollah. Israeli troops are simultaneously expanding their ground offensive in southern Lebanon. Airstrikes targeted several houses and commercial shops in El Mansouri in the district of Tir. More than 1,000 people have been killed in Lebanon and over 1 million displaced since hostilities resumed between Israel and Hezbollah on March the 2nd. Well, Bernard Smith has more for us from Beirut.
Hezbollah doesn't tell us how many casualties it suffered or what sort of damage it suffered. Israel's military speculates on the numbers of fighters it's killed, but there's no way of getting independent verification of it. It's worth saying this evening that Hezbollah has said that it's been fighting with Israeli forces with medium and long-range weapons for the town of Hayam, which is a strategically important town. It's high up. Israel, in previous confrontations with Hezbollah in previous wars, has tried to take this town. It's never tried to manage it. It's strategically important because if Israel gets it, it cuts off Hezbollah's supply routes from the east to the south. Hezbollah needs to keep it because it gives this panorama view over southern Lebanon and northern Israel. And it is fair to say that since the last conflict, Hezbollah has been weakened. Its traditional supply lines from Iran through Syria have been cut off. So it is in a weakened position, but impossible to say exactly how so.
Lou Cormack is the country director for Doctors Without Borders in Lebanon, and she says conditions are deteriorating every single day.
That's 20% of the population that have been forced to move from their homes to try and seek safety in a very short space of time. It's been 2 weeks since the displacement started. And so we're seeing people who have had to move